Hi, everybody. This is Better Building with Buck. We are on episode 10. We are talking with Mark Bernhardt with Bernhardt Contracting. We're going to be talking about energy step code and zero carbon step code. And yeah, he's our energy advisor, and I've been stoked to work with him. And we look forward to seeing what we can chat about today.
Yeah, right on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Long
no
time
worries.
listener, first time caller.
No, I did what I wanted to share with you today is that I was really I've been really appreciative of when I have gone out and watched your presentations or how welcoming you were when I started to come out to the Canadian Home Builders meeting. So I did want to thank you about that because it's
And I've actually now really appreciated your presentations as well. And I don't know if did I don't know if I told you, but I actually assigned watching some of your YouTube videos as homework for the CHBA Net Zero class.
nice.
That one you recorded about your net zero one in Cowichan Lake there.
Yeah.
I've been asking the students to go watch it, and
Oh,
then
sweet.
and then we talk about it afterwards, right?
Oh,
Like,
sweet. That's
what
awesome.
would you do differently in your area? What did you like? That sort of stuff. And so it's actually been really helpful because I like that one because it's a relatively simple home, like it's a sort of an everyman type of home, like reasonably affordable and kind of a normal house. It's not one of those like glitzy magazine cover type of homes that
Yeah.
people often associate with these fancy high performance houses, right? It's like that normal house, and which is one of the reasons I really like that one. Actually, I like normal looking houses that achieve high standards.
Yeah, and like there was definitely we're still learning and we still lots of things to kind of accomplish, but you got to start somewhere and getting those details sorted out and like with that being said, I actually got like a survey the other day about from BC Hydro and about their program and I filled it out and they said like, do you think you would have done this without the grant? And it's like probably not, to be honest.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that learning curve of trying to get things sorted out and is definitely been helpful. And like I hope that other builders are trying to take that opportunity to if there's even much of the grant left at this point that they're able to kind of work their way through some of these systems and layering and just giving themselves the opportunity to just get better instead of just being that
for
the
sure. Well, at the time of this recording, there is no grant left, of at least the
oh
BC Hydro
okay.
grants, and which is unfortunate because you're right, right? Like taking that risk of starting something new or trying something different, that's a risk for a business, right? And
Yeah,
like our businesses are set up to do that risk, and we're willing to take that risk.
right.
Um, but not everybody is, and it's not practical for everybody. So having that grant was is sort of de-risk those sort of new experiments and stuff like that. And I think that's important. One of the things there is out there though for grants on new construction is CMHC does have a new-ish program. I think it's their Eco Plus, as I think is what they call it. But
Okay.
mortgage holders who are applying for a mortgage can get a pretty substantial rebate on their mortgage insurance for buying a home that is step three or higher. And
Oh,
so
okay.
step three is our minimum requirement now here in BC. So
Right.
that's every home in BC actually qualifies for this program. And so on an $800,000 house, it's about $7,500.
Oh,
It goes to the mortgage holder. So you
right.
apply, and it's really easy. You just fill out a little form, and the mortgage holder then gets that rebate. So it's a nice little incentive for your buyer.
Does that scale up as you go higher on the step code or no?
No, it's the same no matter what level of step code
Oh, okay.
you hit. And there is a cap. So if your mortgage is over $1 million, you can't get it.
Mm.
But the house can be over $1 million, just not the mortgage.
Okay.
So the higher end homes wouldn't really qualify in that case if you've got a substantial mortgage.
Right. Cool. Um, Yeah, so like going back to the zero carbon initiative and kind of some of the things that people have at top of mind and I was actually just chatting with my dad about this before we got on and he's like, "Oh, well, I don't know." And I said, "Well, it's on new homes and it's it's to try and in my mind at least and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's to try and get people to build a house to a higher level so that you don't actually need this robust system to actually heat it. You have a smaller heating system, which then is, your smaller um, output of energy and in turn you just don't need that much juice to fill the
Yeah.
tank.
Yeah, and particularly here for us on Vancouver Island, I mean, that's kind of the idea, right? Between the step code and the zero carbon step code. So, step code brings the energy down so you can have that lower energy use. And then zero carbon steers us towards that lower carbon fuel.
Right.
And here on the island, that's actually the cheapest option already. I mean, burning gas is the more expensive option. Installing gas is the more expensive option. And so, when we're looking at that affordable or attainable housing for families, it we're not installing gas anymore. It's too expensive,
Right.
and we're doing it for economic reasons. Largely more than the environmental reasons. But of course, those are kind of nice to be following as well.
Yeah.
What's really interesting though is Vancouver Island's kind of its little bubble here where we've got those economics and we're relatively warm and things like that. Vancouver area would be in the same boat. What's really interesting though is I just did get back from Prince George teaching a class there this week, and there's a place where you would expect to have real resistance to having an electric only option, right? It's
Right. Yeah,
relatively
that's fair.
cold. And it's sort of gas country or industrial heartland of BC, right? And so you wouldn't necessarily expect that understanding. And certainly there is pockets of resistance, people that aren't too keen on this for sure. That you do see that. But this trip in particular was really quite inspiring because you go there and here's a group of builders that are ready for it. They're doing high performance houses. They're doing all electric. They're working on phasing out gas where they don't need it, and they are doing the math. They are recognizing that even in Prince George, it is actually the same cost or less to go zero carbon. So it's been I don't know, and I certainly don't know of a building code that has ever reduced costs for builders or for homeowners. And what's interesting is that if we're doing it carefully, we're doing proper integrated design and things like that on these buildings, we can actually create buildings that are cheaper not only to build but to run. And these codes sort of give us the tools to do that. And I don't know that there's any other building code that has ever had the possibility of reducing costs. It's not going to happen every time. Of course, there's going
Right.
to be plenty of examples where things got more expensive as well, but it certainly gives us the opportunity to do that. And a number of our developments have experienced that.
Yeah, and kind of, you kind of put these words into my mouth about thinking about health and comfort within the home. And now with all this research showing up with burning fossil fuels inside your house, and what level of ventilation you need to try and achieve kind of getting rid of that off gassing, and do you want to be putting sensors in your house so you can find out if you're actually slowly killing yourself or not, or and how accurate are they, and so on. It just kind of goes on and on if that's the route that you decide to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have CO2 sensors in some of our houses as well, and we see that, right? I mean, we see the effect of good ventilation, and we know. I mean, we can read the reports from World Health Organization and everybody else about how much CO2 is unhealthy.
Right.
You actually start losing brain cells at 1,000 parts per million or something around there. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but
Yeah.
most of us need all those brain cells, and some of us don't have too many to lose.
I'm there.
So yeah, we're already at the minimum. We don't.
Yeah, we're just scraping by here.
and and so when we put those sensors in, like our neighbor's house, for example, they're regularly in that zone.
Right.
Versus our own house, which it is a high performance house with really good ventilation, and we're around background levels like the same as outside most of the time, and so that inevitably will have some sort of long term health effect, and we've seen that in the medical studies. And again, here's another thing that's relatively easy for builders and home buyers to take care of is just have good planned out ventilation. It's a serious comfort issue. And in my experience, people aren't necessarily willing to pay much for energy efficiency, but they are willing to pay for comfort. So, builders out there that might be nervous about spending the extra money on the good ventilation and such, I wouldn't necessarily advertise that as good ventilation. A lot of people won't understand why that's important. But if we advertise it and market it as comfort, that is something in my experience that really sells very well, and that new home buyers are very much interested in doing. And on top of that as well as health, right? That health and comfort combo is really what we've seen success in marketing and seeing people pay the extra for the house, and it's easy development, right? In that case, right? If we're able to sell for a premium, not spend a ton of money to do it, we're just carefully planning, then that's easy developer math all day long.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you want to share your story about the asthma and your son?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So the house I'm in right now is actually the one in the pictures behind me here. And it is my own house, which we've now built, I think, almost 12 years ago. I started down this path maybe 14 or so years ago. And so what one of the things we noticed when we moved into this house, so our previous house was a relatively fully restored 1940s character home, no obvious mold or anything that we knew about anyways. By all Canadian standards, it was a relatively good home. And so our older son, though, has allergies, basically allergic to everything, is what it seemed. And so coming into the new house, what we saw is that an immediate reduction in that. And so every time now and then when the grass season is out, he will still get those back, but it went from like full medication all the time to zero.
Yeah.
And
What can you put a price on that for?
yeah, put a price on your kids' allergies, right? Like, and same thing with smoke season and stuff like that. Put a price on air quality inside your home, right? Here in Victoria, we didn't get crazy smoke this year, but we have had some bad days, and we have a charcoal filter on our HRV here, so it filters out smoke. Incidentally, we actually put it in because our neighbors are really keen on weed, and so it filters out that smell.
Yeah.
Um, but and so that's why we put it in. But then we have this side benefit of, well, forest fire season now, we've got pristine air quality, and where it's asthma terrible zone outside, inside you wouldn't know the difference.
What do you think are some other things that people aren't kind of they're not seeing of like an effect of building a higher performance home? Like we've talked a little bit about like air quality and just now, and we talked a little bit about like comfort. Is there something that you can describe about comfort? Like when somebody is in their house and they're walking through their house, when would be something that would affect them that they would say that they would maybe feel this comfort issue?
Well,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, and there's also like a few different types of comfort, right? Like there's like comfort in the room temperature, and then there's like comfort in my soul kind of thing,
Right.
right? Like that. We'll talk about the soul comfort later, maybe, but the room temperature comfort in a high performance house should be almost the same in every single room, no matter what surface you touch. And that's how it is in our house. So you're not walking out of one room, putting on a sweater, walking into another room, taking it off. The temperature is the same throughout, and usually it's to within a fraction of a degree. Where you would feel that directly and most immediately is when you stand on the concrete slab.
Mm,
So in a typical home, if you stand on your concrete slab, particularly an older home when it's uninsulated, you get that burning cold feeling on your feet.
right.
And you've got to be in slippers if you're going to be comfortable, or you need even with carpet, it doesn't just doesn't feel particularly good. You get that cold feeling. Sometimes it comes across as damp. It may not actually be damp, but it's that sort of bone chilling cold, and you do not get that in this sort of house. So when we insulate slabs, the first few inches are for energy, and that takes care of our energy loss from the slab, and then the next few are for comfort.
Right.
And so something around like an R20 insulated slab tends to be a vastly more comfortable slab. You can stand on it comfortably in bare feet and not have that bone sucking cold.
Right.
And the same thing applies to windows too. If you're sitting beside a big window like these ones in the picture here, that is a 10-foot wide window. It is a big window, but it's a triple pane high performance window. And so you can sit beside it on a very cold day, and be quite comfortable. You don't have that cold waterfall coming off of the window just from the cooling of the air inside. It's not that the window is leaking most of the time. It's actually just that the air on the inside of the window is now cold, and you get this draft off the window.
Right.
And so we don't get that in these high performance windows. And so you can sit beside the window in your shorts in the middle of winter and it doesn't feel cold. And we have, I think we have a couple pictures of our kids when they were younger, standing on the window just in their diaper and looking out at the snow, and
Right.
they're quite comfortable there. And so, and it's something relatively easy to do. One of the things I like about high performance windows is that the builder doesn't have to change their technique at all. And
Right.
so if we're specing a high performance window for one of your jobs, like the build team, okay, it's a little heavier, yeah,
Mm,
for sure. Sometimes a lot heavier if it's a really robust window, but you're not having to change how you install that window. It goes on the wall and you nail it in, right?
right.
So it's not like you have to reinvent how you do a window install, which is kind of nice for industry then, right? We don't have to, people often ask us, what does step 5 window install look like? Well,
Right.
if your window isn't currently leaking water, it looks exactly the same as what you're doing already.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, like for instance, when we did our that house that you talked about in Lake Cowichan, those that was all a double glazed window,
Yeah.
regular. There was nothing too crazy about it, and it's and the other thing too, I guess, is to think about is like how when you're going through the step code, there's the trade-off and trying to like where do you feel like the builder's going to be able to best utilize their resources and their skills to like achieve this house as a system. And yeah, it's I like that part that you can start to pull different pieces to try and build out this assembly. So it's not so cookie cutter. In some ways, I think that's good and bad in the fact that like it's good for somebody that wants to get better, and it's bad for somebody that just keeps doing the same thing over and over again, but then can't get there because all they want to do is what they've ever done.
Well, and even for those people though, so we've done a number, we have a number of builder clients that are like that are just kind of the just tell me what to do type of builder.
Okay,
And and so for them, like the key there is getting the design right. So starting with the design, if you're going to go and repeat 100 of these houses and maybe they're mirror images or whatever, let's get the design right. So we get that integrated design done, and so that we're building compact forms that are simple forms, they're easy to air barrier, they're all that sort of stuff. We start there, then we start looking at what else we need to do, and quite often it's not very much.
right,
And from there, then you're right about that, like using the builder's skill and what they're good at already. Um, like first when we're doing an optimization for a builder, uh, unless they're really familiar with things like exterior insulation and stuff, that's going to be last on the list because we know that's an expensive upgrade.
right,
We're going to have to learn a bunch of new things. We're going to have to try a bunch of new things. A bunch of the details are going to change. So that's going to be one of the last things we change. And like you say, it's a trade-off, right? So, we can go really high on one thing and really low on another as long as it sort of balances out. Typically, we're kind of going medium on everything, and that sort of works out to be pretty well. But like I say, it's if we can get away with like a standard wall that everybody's used to, everybody knows how to deal with this, and then when we go like a couple extra inches on the attic or something, which is just the insulator up there with his hose a little longer, it's no big
right.
deal, very cheap. Those are the sorts of things that we would look for first before we would start going to the triple pane windows and the exterior insulation. And in my experience, those are really only required on the crazier houses. Like if you've got a beachfront mansion,
Right.
that's sort of the thing when we're going to start to see that sort of stuff. And if you've got a beachfront mansion, cost is not your primary motivator typically.
Yeah, it's how big can I make this window,
That's right.
and
Yeah,
and and how uncomfortable could I potentially feel behind it?
that's right. The neighbor's house had 2 big opening sliders for their Ferrari to drive in, so I have to have 3.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, it's an interesting world that we have decided to go down and be part
Yeah,
of. That's for sure.
yeah,
Trying to navigate all of the parts and pieces of uh what you have at top of mind as the builder and what the client does, and trying to figure out how we're going to come together to build something that everybody's stoked about.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
well, and that's
Go
one of
ahead.
the things. Like, if for builders, if the earlier they start with their energy team, the better off things are going to be, right? And as much as I enjoy killing people's dreams from time to time, it's always a lot easier if I don't have to.
Right.
And so if we can start early in that design and get it where we can still change things before the client is really in love with it, And then we can have a huge effect on the project. We can reduce costs after the client is in love with it and doesn't want to change it. Then it's all cost.
Right.
It's that's where those costly horror stories come in about all these different codes, right?
Yeah. And I think the one thing that I just bumped into on my last project was like how people want to take in the views and how that can affect a project. And you can't be not happy or disappointed with the customer because they've decided that they wanted to take in that view. It's just like,
Yeah.
well, how do we navigate through this? And it might cost more to do that. And do they
Yeah.
want to do that is a whole another question.
Well,
And
yeah, and you bring up a good point. Like if you buy a lakefront property, well, you're not going to turn away from the lake, right?
yeah,
That's ridiculous. That's why you bought the property. I think what's important for, and I hope real estate professionals and stuff start taking this really into account, is that understanding that, okay, we're buying a lot that has a certain view that maybe faces a direction that is not ideal. That's not going to give us any advantage. And and that may have an increased cost on our house. And we have to factor that in when we're buying the lot. So if you buy the lot on the other side of the lake that is ideally located, maybe you can pay a little bit more money for that lot because our house is going to be cheaper. On this side of the lake, well, we probably want to pay a little less for that lot
right.
because it's not as ideally located. And then we start talking about tuning though too. And I think sure, Pinterest is full of like houses that are just pure glass,
Mm,
which is silly. It's not particularly comfortable at all, and not particularly resilient either to do that. But when we're in design and the client is hopefully willing to change a bit, quite often what we talk about is maybe raising the bottom of the window just a little bit, because that first 18 inches to 24 inches is actually just a view of your deck.
right.
You may have a spectacular deck that you want to look at, and you did such a great job on it that we want the view of the deck. But the view of the deck is not why we bought the property. We want the lake, and the lake only requires a window like this. It doesn't require one that's like that, right? The top 24 inches are just a view of your soffit.
Right.
Do we really need that? And do we really need it 100% glass? Maybe if there was a little bits of wall in between the glass, that's not so bad. We still see the entire lake. We still have that. But it's a slight sort of pulling back. We're not saying no windows on that side. We're just saying let's be a little bit more realistic. Let's pull it down and plan it out a little bit better rather than just saying all glass all the time and such. And that just those little tweaks are a game changer and pull it into a realm of where not only it's affordable, but it's, then practical. We can actually get the products and stuff that we need to do it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point that you shared because like it you have to think about how you're living in this house. Like you're only so tall and you're
Yeah.
only going to be looking in this view. Like you have this section of window and it's like you say, looking at the deck. It's do you really need to pay for that?
Well, you imagine yourself sitting in your rocking chair looking out at the lake, you know, where is the lake in relation to that wall, right? It's not the whole 10-foot tall. It's probably actually just this.
Right.
And sure, we made a little more so we can see the squirrel in the tree and the lawn maybe too, for sure. But yeah, I think some of our traditional or not. This is not even really traditional. It's the design aesthetics of the last 10 years have really been energy inefficient
Mm,
and particularly costly as well. They're very articulated buildings, lots of bumps and doodles, really, really high glazing. And that has been a problem of the last few years where people get kind of carried away with that. And then there's this expectation in society to have that. But if you look at something that was built in even the 1990s or older, there's way less glass, way less glass. And the shapes are much more simple. So, if you go back to like a 1910 house, very relatively small windows often, um, very simple shape. And that is a traditional design of a Canadian home. And they're much, much more energy efficient. They are much more comfortable typically. Well, if assuming they were built to modern standards, they'd be much more comfortable
right.
and much cheaper to build as well. So
Do you want to
I think
maybe oh, sorry, good.
yeah, I was just saying like if we're going to be building for the future, it's almost like we're looking back 100 years and taking the designs from that time.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. I actually I follow this guy, Brent Hall, and he does all these videos on thinking about how things were built in the past and bringing that to new. And it's I just love the videos. They're so awesome. But the one thing that I did want to kind of chat about is, thinking about if we're getting to this boxy design and how we're going to trying to incorporate these exterior details and trying to, you know, get people's minds wrapped around that. Yes, you can still have a box of a shape, but then there's the opportunity to do covered porch, back deck area, and give that building more shape, because there's been this idea of all these extensions and bump outs and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
you have a way to describe that. It was
Yeah,
did you
and big, boxy, and beautiful is the usually the term. And I was just going to look up and see if I could pull out a picture from one of my talks here. But one of the things that I recently did is took a bit of we have some properties out east, and so working out there, I was hanging around in the Lunenburg area a couple of years ago. There we've got the oldest houses in the country, or some of the oldest houses in the country. They're wood houses, they're wood frame, sitting on probably a rubble foundation of some kind. And they're squares. They're absolute squares. Like, it's your classic East Coast box. And they have even little windows on all sides. Still a fair number of windows, but they're like, two windows. It's the classic thing you would draw in kindergarten if your teacher asked you to draw a house,
right?
right? Little chimney with a little curl of smoke coming out. And triangle on top, cube below. And these are 150-year-old houses, and they would have been built by poor fishermen at the time, who probably had way too many kids and needed a place to put them all. Probably couldn't afford the coal or the wood to heat it in the winter, so it had to be energy efficient. And so there's the typical is like a 2-story with a little triangle on top of the roof. And these houses, if we built them to modern standards today, they're step 4 or 5 easily,
Right.
easily, without breaking a sweat, without adding triple pane windows, without adding exterior insulation. And it's just by their nature of being boxy. And anybody who's traveled around in that area, those East Coast homes are pretty cool looking, I think. They have that heritage look. They have all this sort of character to them and stuff. And like you say, like, people have added wraparound porches to them so they don't look like a box. There's maybe a little mudroom built off the side that's maybe heated or not. There's little decoration around the windows. The roof line changes a little bit. All these different things that we can add to the box. And we say, decorate the envelope, don't decorate with the envelope.
There we go. That was the term.
And yeah, and so it becomes relatively easy to do. Like, to stick a pergola on the side of a house is relatively cheap. To take that house and bend it around a corner and make a dip in the house itself is quite expensive.
Right.
And we can have great looking houses then, with this sort of decoration on the outside. Spend the money on the siding and then, maybe some fancy brick or something like that, and have something cool looking, a little different than, the neighbor's house. And I think that looks pretty cool.
Yeah, I do agree. And those photos that you're talking about, I'll throw some of those up while we're when we start to edit this video a bit.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
but yeah, it's if that's okay with you, that is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll send them over to you.
Yeah. But yeah, we're getting closer to the end of the time here. I mean, yeah, this is awesome. So thank you so much for making time to do this. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share at the end here?
I
Do you want?
think
Yeah,
sure.
go
I
ahead.
think the next big thing that we're really going to be spending a lot of time talking about in home building and stuff is now resiliency. We're past the point, or very close to the point of being past that 1.5 degree heating. And
Right.
that means we are going to see, fires, floods, cold, hot, all the different things. And so, the next thing that my team is really starting to look at is that resiliency, and building and designing houses that when the power goes out, we're not going to freeze to death. We're gonna be okay for 2 weeks if we need to be. same thing in the hot side of things. If we're in a heat dome, the power goes out, what happens to the people in that house?
Mm.
Forest fires and things like that as well. And that I think is our next frontier. We can easily do the energy, we can easily do the carbon. Now we need to make houses that are safe for people, even in more extreme weather.
Yeah, that's super cool. Cool. Well, I look forward to seeing how that develops through whether that's our building code or people getting excited about it, and hopefully it's actually the community getting excited about it. Because that sure makes it easier for us as the builders to go through and make these help you guys make these choices. But yeah. Anyways, very nice to have you on here again, Mark, and I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay,
Thanks for
bye
having
for
me.
now.